We go back now in the second parak to discuss the halachos of the reading of the Megillah, which we had digressed when we mentioned the concept of Ein Bein, the difference between Adar Rishon and Adar Sheni. The Mishnah tells us various methodologies in which one may not read the Megillah. Hakoreas ha-Megillah lemafreya. If a person reads the Megillah backwards, and that does not only mean you read the last word first and then the word before it, but it means even if you read the psukim out of order, lo yatsa, you do not fulfill your obligation. Similarly, kira'ah al peh, if you read it by heart, as it is Torah shebesav, it must be read inside, or kira'ah targum, if you read it in Aramaic, and you do not understand the language, as we'll see, or b'chol lashon, in any other language which you do not understand, lo yatsa, you do not fulfill your obligation. Aval, however, koren oso lalo azos, you can read it to a foreigner, bela'az, in his foreign language. The Mishnah will speak later how it has to be written, but it can be read in a foreign language to a foreigner who understands that language. However, everyone who hears the Megillah in Lashon HaKodesh, v'haloes sheshama ashuras, a foreigner who hears it in Lashon HaKodesh, even if he does not understand the Megillah, yatsa, he does fulfill his obligation. In the Gemara, they explain that there are certain words in the Megillah which no one understands, and therefore and yet we fulfill the obligation when read in Lashon HaKodesh. Says the Mishnah, certain cases in which, although it's not ideal, you could be yotze if you did read it. Kira'ah seirugin, if you read it, seirugin means choppy, part you stop. Or misnamnim, or when you were drowsing off, yatsa, you do fulfill the obligation. What happens if a person happened to have read the Megillah, but he did not necessarily do it in the normal fashion you would read? Haya kosva, what happens if he was writing a Megillah? He's copying it from another Megillah, so he's reading it inside and then writing. Otherwise, if he's writing it by heart, he doesn't fulfill his obligation because you have to read it from inside. Darsha, or he was expounding on the Megillah. He read a pasuk and expounded on it. Next pasuk, and it turns out he read the whole Megillah. Umagia, or he's correcting it. In other words, he's following the Megillah inside for the purposes of correcting it. So the Mishnah says in Kibin Libo, if he had intention to fulfill his obligation, Yatza, like we learned by Kriya Shema, V'yim Lav, in the second paragraph of Brachos, V'yim Lav, and if he didn't have that intention, Lo Yatza, you do not fulfill your obligation. Now the Mishnah discusses how it has to be written. Hoysa Kesuva B'Sam, if it was written in Sam, is a type of reddish dirt, Ubesikra, which is red dye, Ubekomos, which is a tree sap, Ubekankanton, which is a water solvent which is made with copper, al haniyar, if it's written on paper. So this is till now we were talking about the ink. Now we're talking about the parchment if it was written on paper. Al hadiftara, diftara is parchment which has not properly been processed. Lo yatsa, you can't fulfill your obligation even though the reading is good. The writing or the scroll isn't good. Achete kesuva ashuras, it must be written in Lashon HaKodesh letters. Al hasefer, it has to be written on a properly processed parchment, ubidiyo, and in permanent ink. The fact the Mishnah says that it has to be written ashuras over here leads many of the commentaries to understand that even though it can be written transliterated, in other words, you can write it in English and read it in English if you understand English, but it has to have letters of Lashon HaKodesh. So it would actually be transliterated, written in Hebrew letters, but phonetically sounding like English. Mishnah Gimel discusses the fact that we know that a Ben-Ir, a member of a regular city, reads the Megillah on the 14th of Adar, and the member of a krach, of a walled city, reads the Megillah on the 15th of Adar. What happens if a person is traveling? Fundamentally, the principle of the Mishnah is that if you've moved to a different city, immediately you get the law of that city. The question is going to become, what happens if you do not or do plan on returning to your city? Please pay careful attention to the way we will understand this Mishnah. Ben-Ir shahalach lekrach, the member of a city who's supposed to read on the 14th, who traveled to a larger city. Uben krach shahalach le'ir, or the member of a large city who's traveling to a smaller city. So the Mishnah says very generically, Im osid lachazor lemikomo, if you intend to return to your place. We will interpret that to mean if you intend to return your place by the morning of the 14th. In other words, the Mishnah is dealing with, should he read on the night of the 14th? He finds himself in a city or finds himself in a walled city, should he read on the night of the 14th? So the Mishnah says everything is determined by the morning of the 14th. If by the morning of the 14th you're planning on going back to your place, Korei Kimikomo, you have the halacha of your city. So if you're a member of a regular unwalled city who's traveled to a large city, even if you're there the night of the 14th, but during the night you're going to travel back home, you must already read the Megillah the night of the 14th. Vice versa, a person from a walled city who travels to an unwalled city, and he's there the night of the 14th, so long as he's planning on leaving during that night and won't be there in the morning, he can wait to read the Megillah until he returns home on the night of the 15th. V'im lav, if he's not planning on returning over the night, Koreh imoim, he reads with them. In other words, his halacha is determined on the morning of the 14th. Says the Mishnah, we learned earlier that you can't read the Megillah backwards and fulfill your obligation. But how much of the Megillah do you need to hear in order to fulfill your obligation? From where? From which point? Does a person have to read or hear the reading of the Megillah and fulfill your obligation? Rab Meir says, Kula, you need to hear the whole story of the Megillah, everything that involves Achashverosh. Rabbi Yehuda says it's enough that if you hear Me'ish Yehudi from when Mordechai is introduced into the Megillah, that's enough in order to fulfill your obligation. Rabbi Yossi says Me'achar HaDevarim Ha'ela from the beginning of the 3rd chapter of the Megillah, which introduces the story of the Nes, the story of the wickedness of Haman. Mishnah Dal discusses who can read the Megillah. Hakol Kasher Megillah, everybody can read the Megillah. The Gemara says that this includes women, since they are equally obligated, since they participated in the miracle, even though it's a time-bound mitzvah. Chutz mecheresh shota v'katan, except a cheresh, which normally means a deaf mute, a person who couldn't speak or can't hear. Here it means even if he just can't hear, because clearly if he's planning on reading it and being motzi you, he can speak. Shota, an imbecile, a person who lacks intelligence, v'katan, and a minor. Rabbi Yehuda machshav v'katan, Rabbi Yehuda says that a minor who has achieved a status of chinuch can go ahead and read the Megillah on behalf of other people, since their obligation is rabbinic in nature as well. The Mishnah now talks about the reading of the Megillah during the day, even though we know that you have to read the Megillah both at night and during the day. It seems in the Mishnah the primary reading of the Megillah is during the day. In Korinus HaMegillah, one may not read the Megillah. V'lo molin, one may not circumcise, which must be done during the day, can't be done at night. V'lo tovlin, in general, a person who's tameh goes to the mikvah during the day, and then his tahara is completed at nightfall. V'lo mazin, and you can sprinkle the ashes of the red heifer on a person who is corpse tameh mace, on days 3 and 7 of his purification process. V'chein shomeres yom keneged yom. Shomeres yom keneged yom means a woman who is tameh for one day, watching one day against the day that she is tameh. That is, that a woman who saw blood not during her menstrual cycle, and she is a zava katana, a minor zava, and she's tameh for one day. So the halacha is she's tameh on day 1, she goes to the mikvah the next day, and she will be tar at night, retroactively, if she didn't see another sighting of blood. Lo titbol, they should not go to the mikvah or do any of their services. Achatane tzachama. The definition of the beginning of day is by sunrise. V'chulam, all of the aforementioned people, reading of the Megillah, circumcision, mikvah, and so on. Sha'ala, misha'asu, misha'ala amar hashachar, if they do it from the beginning of dawn, which is generically understood to be about 72 minutes before sunrise, says the Mishnah, b'di'evet, the halacha is that it is kosher. The last two Mishnayos of this parak deal, Mishnah Hey, with 21 mitzvos that can be done only during the day, and Mishnah Vav, mitzvos which can be done only during or also during the night. Says the Mishnah, Kol Hayom, during the entire day, which we've defined earlier means ideally from the time of sunrise until sunset. Kosher is kosher, L'kriyas HaMegillah, for the reading of the Megillah of the day. Again, we focus on the Megillah reading of the day. V'L'kriyas HaHallel, on days when we read Hallel, it can be read any time during the day. Ulitzkiya shofar, on Rosh Hashanah, the shofar can be blown any time during the day. V'Lenetilas lulav, on Sukkot you can carry the lulav any time during the day. V'Letfilas hamusafim, on days where there's an added tefillah of musaf, this can be davened any time during the day. V'Lamusafim means the bringing of the musaf sacrifice in the Beis Hamikdash can be done any time during the day. Ulevidui par haparim, vidui haparim means the confession which is done by the Sanhedrin in various karbanos which are brought by the public, based on the erroneous ruling of the Sanhedrin, and the majority of the public followed their ruling. So when you bring the par helem davar shal tzibor, the confession, the vidui, the confession, and the we'll see the leaning of the zakenim on the animal can be done any time during the day. Ulevidui maser, the confession that you have tithed everything properly. In years 4 and 7 of the Shemitah cycle, a person comes to the Beis Hamikdash and he makes the vidui maser, the confession that he had tithed everything properly. Ulevidui Yom HaKippurim, the confession that the Kohen Gadol does on the goat that's going to be sent out to the cliff, can be done anytime during the day of Yom Kippur. The smicha, any person who brings a karban has to go ahead and put his hands and put his entire weight on the head of the animal. It can be done anytime during the day. V'leshchita, and you can slaughter a karban anytime during the day. L'tzenufa, the various karbanos that require waving, which is generally karban mincha, and also specifically portions of other karbanos, can be done anytime during the day. Lehagasha, to bring close, that is to bring close. Generally, the mincha offering is brought close to the southwest corner of the mizbeach before you take the kamitza, the fistful. That has to be done during any time during the day. L'kamitza, the act of taking the fistful of flour and oil and all the frankincense off the mincha, again during the day. L'aktara, and the burning of that kometz of the mincha has to be done, can be done any time during the day. to the slaughtering of a bird, which is done by sticking your nail of your thumb in the nape of the neck. Again, this is parallel to shechita, has to be done during the day. Ula kabbalah, the receiving of the blood, has to be done during the day. Ula hazaya, the sprinkling of the blood of the various karbanos, has to be done during the day. Ula hashkoyas sota, the Torah tells us that under certain circumstances, a woman who has been accused by her husband of having had seclusion with another man has to be given to drink the mei hamorim, the bitter waters, by the Kohen in the Beis Hamikdash. This process takes place during the day. Vela arifas or egla, if you find a corpse out in the field, we don't know who killed him, so the halacha is that the city closest to the corpse has to bring a service of an egla arufa, when you decapitate the back of the neck of the calf. And that has to be done during the day. The purification process of a mitzorah described in Parshas Mitzorah has to be done during the day. So all the time during the day, anytime from sunrise until sunset, you can do these processes mentioned. Obviously, since some of the processes are the beginning, in other words, by a mincha you have to do hagasha, kmitza, and so on. So you're going to have to do it a little bit more than right before sunset, because you have to finish the rest of the service also before sunset. Says the Mishnah, the flip side of Mishnah Vav, Kol halayla, the entire night, kosher l'ktiras omer, is kosher to go ahead and cut the omer. On the night of the 16th of Nisan, that is the first night of Chol HaMoed Pesach, they would cut the new barley to bring the Karban HaOmer on the first day of Chol HaMoed Pesach. This can be done anytime during the night. Ulehekter chalavim ve'evarim, the cutting, the burning of the fats and the limbs of various karbanos. The limbs of the Karban Olah, the fats of all karbanos go on the Mizbeach. Now this is not only kosher during the night, but it means if you didn't put them on the Mizbeach during the day, they can be done anytime during the night. And this is in contrast to the Ketziras HaOmer, which ideally should be done specifically at night. Says the Mishnah, Ze'aklal, here is your rule in summation. Davar shemitzvah b'yom, something whose mitzvah is to be done during the day, kosher kol hayom, can be done any time during the day, from sunrise until sunset. Davar shemitzvah b'layla, something whose mitzvah is at night, kosher kol halayla, can be done all night, at least biblically. This also includes the eating of the Karban Pesach, where according to the author of our Mishnah, you can eat it all night. As you recall, this was a machlokas between Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah and Rabbi Akiva when it came to Mesechus Psachim. This Mishnah is of the opinion that at least biblically, one could go ahead and eat the Karban Pesach the entire night.